Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Flyers Files podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Durso, and here we are once again, another week of Flyers hockey in the books. Before we get started, just remember to follow along with me and my coverage of the Philadelphia Flyers throughout the season at Kevin_Durso on social media for anything that you're looking for. Don't forget the Instagram reels, pre and post game, all of that. So be sure to stay tuned for everything coming up. And here's our rundown for the show today, episode 2. We're going to go through the week that was for the Flyers, 4 games since the last episode. So we'll highlight a couple of things from those games, have some discussion topics lined up for the show, some injuries that the Flyers are going through, Rick Tocchet with some interesting things to say after Sunday's game in particular, and special teams, all part of the picture for later on this show this week. And then don't forget, we'll have our 3 stars of the week coming up at the end of the show, and look ahead to the week that is to come for the Flyers as things move on. So let's start with the week that was, and the Flyers start things off pretty well as they continued a 5-game homestand. The third game of that homestand was a 4-1 win over the Nashville Predators last Thursday, and it really kind of kept shining a spotlight on how well things were going for the Flyers on home ice. A 4-1 win, fairly convincing, and in the process, the Flyers moved to 3-0 on the homestand, 6-1 at home at the time, and everything was really looking like it was coming up Flyers. Everything was looking really good, a 6-3-1 record at the end of 10 games. The overtime loss to Carolina, a debatable one. 3 losses out of the 4 that were 1-goal games. 2 of them were 2-1 losses. So you felt pretty good about like where things were with the Flyers, all things considered, and then kind of got a reality check over the weekend. Saturday, they lose to Toronto 5-2, and it was a game that started off well and then faded fairly quickly. And then Sunday, a 2-1 loss to the Calgary Flames, another lackluster game. The Flyers only took 18 shots on goal in the game against Calgary, and that was a team that came in with only 2 wins on the season, so you were looking for that bounce back. You kind of understood the Toronto game, right? Maybe you just don't have your best stuff. Maybe the team just wasn't able to keep up with the talent level that Toronto has. It makes sense. You understand how that can happen. Calgary with 2 wins on the season and struggling to score for most of it, yeah, that doesn't add up. It shouldn't have been the way that it was, and that's kind of why after 2 games like that back-to-back, it really kind of hit pretty hard that, okay, everything was looking really good, and all of a sudden, just like that, 2 games over that weekend that not only don't go your way, but that are pretty poor performances, that not a lot of shots, not a lot of action, and as a result, you go from 6-3-1 to 6-5-1, and everybody kind of took a step back and was like, okay, now we're seeing the shades of who we expected the Flyers to be, and this is why the start isn't something to get overly hyped about and everything like that. And then come out on Tuesday and respond to Rick Tocchet's message, which we're going to get to a little later in the show, and open up a 3-0 lead in the first 8 minutes of the game. That's a pretty big statement. And then everything seems to just not go their way in the second period. The lead is gone. They're trailing 4-3. They're out shooting Montreal by just a ton. I think shots after 2 periods were 29-10 or something like that. And in the third period, you've got to buckle down. You've got to try to find a way. They do get the game-tying goal, and then you go to the shootout, where the Flyers have had a lot of success this year, and Trevor Zegras is a key reason why. Zegras was a big part of just about every game that goes on as you go through this. He picks up 2 goals and an assist in the win against Nashville. He continues that point streak on home ice with an assist against Toronto. He ends up with no points against Calgary, and then comes back against Montreal with 2 more assists and scores the shootout goal. And, who knows? He obviously would have been used if he was available for the Pittsburgh shootout. And who knows? I mean, he's got the highest shootout percentage of anybody in National Hockey League history. And he just seems to do pretty much the same thing almost every single time. It's a slow and steady approach, picks up some speed, decides what he wants to do, and kind of fools the goaltender into thinking, I know what, you're going to shoot it. I know you're going to shoot it, but he makes you think there's one more move and then just lets it go and usually beats the goalie 5-hole. So he's just one of those key players. He was all over setting up 2 power play goals in the game against Montreal. Bobby Brink gets 1 on a rebound. Cam York gets 1 on a one-timer, and Brink had 2 goals in that game. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. Nikita Grabenkin getting the game-tying goal. That's really good for him, too. He's been pretty solid in limited time, all things considered. He's had some moments where you can see the youth in his game and the areas that he would need to improve upon, but he's been consistent enough that at least he's shown he has a place in the lineup, and now you're starting to see maybe some of those points come from that. He had a nice setup on Christian Dvorak's goal to start the Toronto game. That was pretty much, you're starting to see little pieces of his game keep evolving and get in that right direction. So good for him for getting a goal and it being a crucial one because it helps the Flyers ultimately get it to a shootout where they win. And Dan Vladar, while not performing his best, Saturday's game wasn't great. He gets pulled from that one. Could have easily seen a goalie change in this one too, with the way that second period went. It wasn't all on Vladar, but it wasn't a great performance either. And then he really buckled down in the third period shootout as well, and helped the Flyers get that second point when it really counted. Montreal's an incredible team in overtime, held them off the board with a couple of big saves, and then finish it up with the shootout. So we're going to shift gears into some of our discussion topics. And the first thing I'm going to bring up is some of the injuries that have kind of plagued the Flyers of late. We saw Sam Ersson go down with an injury, and it kind of was a bit of a surprise because it wasn't something that happened in a game. It happened after the Flyers win in the shootout against Pittsburgh. He gets the win, and everything looks like it's great. He spoke after the game. Everything seems to be business as usual, and then the next day he's not at practice and apparently had tweaked something warming up or something of that sort, or just maybe woke up with it or something like that. But he's now all of a sudden he goes on IR. Now he is skating with the team again, and he's eligible to play again on Saturday this week, and we'll see if that's a possibility. If he doesn't play Saturday, which he certainly doesn't have to, and honestly, if you hold him out through Saturday, you can probably, first of all, you have a break in the schedule until the following Wednesday anyway. So that's a nice little gap to kind of give you some extra time if needed. And who knows, maybe you really don't even need him until that back-to-back the following weekend, which is ways down the road, but you're trying to be conservative with a guy who's had injury history in the past. And while he's trying to come back from it, it's still something to monitor. And then Sean Couturier ended up missing the game against Toronto because he had blocked a shot, some friendly fire in the game against Nashville, left the game after the first period, did not return. He did come back by Sunday's game, but clearly was impacted by the friendly fire there. And then in the same game against Toronto, Tyson Forrester blocked a shot that ultimately led to him going on IR. Now, the good news is it sounds like, by all accounts, this is going to be time on IR and then work your way back into the lineup fairly soon. Again, think about the possibility of maybe that Wednesday game against Edmonton in a week, more likely the weekend back-to-back. And even after that, even if he misses those 3 games, you get another stretch of days off from gameplay where you can work him back into the lineup. So I'm thinking for sure by the 20th, when the Flyers take on the St. Louis Blues at home, that would be a game to certainly expect him back based on everything that we seem to know so far. But still, blocks a shot with his foot. You feared the worst, and Forster's been one of the best players on the team, and now you're trying to figure out how to fill the void there, and it's noticeable. It's noticeable when you have a guy who's good on the forecheck, who's good at being able to put the puck in the net also, but really makes a lot of things happen in different ways. And so now all of a sudden, and I mean, this happened in a matter of days, all of a sudden the Flyers have injuries all over the place, and you see each guy what kind of went into that. And you're still dealing without Ersson, who could come off of IR by this weekend, but you're still waiting to find out if that's feasible and responsible for that matter. And then similarly, you have the Forrester injury, which you're trying to work through as well. And Sean Couturier's was very limited, but still you get the picture that he's back now, but it's something to monitor. It's still something to monitor whenever somebody is trying to deal with pain management or soreness or something that happens like blocking a shot. It's something to monitor, and it's something to keep in mind about as you try to go forward, making sure that you have all of the pieces at their best, and trying to figure out. We've seen that with Matvei Michkov. An injury report comes out, he tweaked his ankle over the offseason. Well, if that's the reason behind his slow start, you want to be careful with a guy who's trying to recover, and you want to be careful making sure that player is performing to his best and trying to make sure that you don't have something become a recurring injury, have something come back that shouldn't have ever happened, or just bring a guy back too soon, especially early in the year. Like, all accounts, the story on Couturier is that if it was like the playoffs or a playoff run, that he's playing that game on Saturday against Toronto. You don't need to do that in October, though, or in early November. You don't need to do those things so early in the season. Did it hurt the Flyers that night? I would say so. They didn't seem like they were as connected as they usually are, or struggling to complete passes, not on the same page. And when you break up your line combinations, that can have something to do with it. So certainly valid points, but something that you're still treating it very carefully. And as the injuries kind of have piled up here, but you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, you're just hoping for nothing more extensive than that. So far, things seem to be in the right direction with that, and you have good timelines, it seems, on everybody else. Of course, now granted, Forster, the early indication with Forster is that it's good news and it's a positive outlook, and he could return fairly soon. He was supposed to be reevaluated 3 to 4 days after the team put him on IR, which was at the very beginning of the week. It was right ahead of that Sunday game, or retroactive to Saturday. Regardless, we're coming right up on it. The middle of this week is exactly that time frame when he's going to get reevaluated, and you should have some idea of whether or not he's going to be back sooner, or if something changed with that. It sure seems like they avoided the worst, but you just never know until the guy is firmly back on the ice and back in the lineup on a regular basis. So I want to get into our next topic. And Rick Tocchet had some interesting things to say on Sunday. We're going to play some audio of that in just a minute. But the thing about those two games over the weekend, when you don't generate a lot of shots, when you don't get a lot of opportunities, when opportunities are limited for you in a game, and sometimes there's games like they played against Winnipeg earlier this year where the other team doesn't get a lot of shot chances either, or shots on goal, and it's kind of equal for both sides. And the Calgary game was a little bit like that, but you kind of feel like after, even on a back-to-back, with the way Calgary's season was going, you need to be able to handle a team like that. You need to be able to take care of business against teams that are at the bottom. And Toronto was, to a degree, too. Toronto hadn't exactly gotten off to the best start and didn't have William Nylander in the lineup, and yet you get burned by Austin Matthews and John Tavares and Morgan Riley and Matthew Nyes and guys like that, and that's what ultimately shifts the game to be what it is and to be the result that it is. But through 2 periods of that game, you only have 14 shots on goal, and that is a problem. Similarly, when you have 18 shots on goal in the game on Sunday against Calgary, that is a problem. That's not enough. And ultimately, the message got through, because Rick Tocchet was a little bit beside himself at the end of Sunday's game with a back-to-back with next to no shots. We're trying to drill it home to these guys. We're trying to make sure that this is ingrained in them. You've got to get to the hard ice, and you've got to take more shots, get more pucks on net, and make things happen. But he said something else that was really interesting, and talking about more than just shot mentality and things like keeping it simple. Before the game, he had all of those things to say. Shot mentality, keep it simple, was part of the message from the night before as well, after the loss to Toronto. But after losing to Calgary, Rick Tocchet said something along the lines of talking about leadership and guys having to find the will to do those things, and to then, I guess, therefore, make an impact on the game by having the will to go to the hard areas and get the shots on net and get to the net and play in front of the net to screen the goalie and do everything like that. And he's not the guy who names names, and understood. But you got the idea by talking about leadership. There's a few people who you can pinpoint as leadership, and that can also be translated to star power to a degree. And no, Trevor Zegras has some star power, and he has not been the problem so far when it comes to getting shots on net or generating offense. He has generated plenty of offense for everybody. But what about Michkov? What about Travis Konechny? What about Owen Tippett, whose hot start seems to have faded? There's your group. There's your kind of core that you're trying to build around, among the others, among Forster, Noah Cates, Bobby Brink, etc. You have all those guys, but there are certain ones that are coming through more and more. And when you can kind of come away from a game like the Calgary game and say, you know what? The fourth line was the best line of the night. That was the one that was most consistent. That was the one that drove play the most. That was the one that seemed like it got the most opportunities. And you've got names like Konechny, Michkov, Kate's Brink, Couturier back in the lineup, Tippett. They've got to make it happen. Somebody's got to go and make it happen. And then you saw against Montreal, Zegers is making it happen. You saw Travis Sanheim have a little bit more of a resurgence in that game. You saw Cam York play a strong game with a multi-point game. Bobby Brink's around the net making things happen. There you go. There's the payoff from it. And ultimately what happens is the Flyers end up with 42 shots on goal in the game. And it's, as Rick Tocchet called it, inspired hockey. But let's go to the audio of what he had to say on Sunday night, because to me, this was speaking volumes, especially when you're only through 12 games of a season. Take a listen.
There's been some chunks of our game we've liked, but when there's some will, our will's being tested right now, and we need some guys to step up, like, you know, leadership. You know, I'm an honest guy. Like I'm not ripping our players, but we need some guys to get some will. You know, I think we have a couple of guys last 2-3 games are accepting that's just another hockey game. The fans pay a lot of money here to watch games, and I don't think we gave them a half decent product the last 2 games. I think they were kind of a boring game, and it falls on myself. I got to get these guys to start to show some will, so that it was, you know, the Flyer fans, if they see some will, they'll cheer you on. If they don't, they're going to get booed.
So that's Rick Tocchet after Sunday's game, and you hear all the key words in there. You know, talking about got to get these guys to find some will, the leadership, that kind of thing. And it's an interesting place to be in 12 games into the season, to see Rick Tocchet go there, to feel the need to go there, to be that brutally honest in front of the media, no less. And while not naming names, having an understanding of, you know, we had just watched the game from what my vantage point and all the other writers that are down there, and we see things like that. We see when somebody doesn't have it on a given night. We see when the whole team doesn't have it. And that was kind of a classic case of the whole team kind of not having it. But when you're looking for somebody to kind of step in and buckle down and make a play, or go to those areas and figure out a way to do something more than just generate 18 kind of weak shots for the most part, and you know, this is a team that had 9 shots through 2 periods against the Calgary Flames, who were at the bottom of the standings coming in. That's where kind of a wake-up call needs to happen. We're not doing enough. We're not getting to those areas. We're not generating enough. We're not scoring enough. And it's going to lead to people believing that while there are some talented offensive players on this roster that have put up some good numbers in their careers, it's not going to be taken seriously if this is the consistent product. And certainly for the fans that show up, it's not going to be good. They don't deserve it. They don't pay good money to see a game like this. It's certainly not the game you introduce somebody who's never watched a hockey game to. And so I think, not only do I think good on Tocchet for bringing it to the forefront here, and he takes accountability for it himself too, but it's really to center around kind of the stigma of Tocchet's coaching style and systems, which is that a lot of his teams end up in the bottom 5 of shots on goal per game. And is there a bit of a correlation to this? Sure. I'm sure there is with systems and things like that. But there's also a lot of times in a game when you see players who look like they may have an opportunity and they pass the puck one too many times, and it leads to a turnover, or it leads to loss of possession, kills the rush, kills a transition, kills anything like that. And that's how you fall into the trap of not only being a team that gets very few shots on goal, but doesn't really have any energy behind your game. That makes you even more boring. And sometimes you have to play boring to win a game. You need the boring style to win a 2-1 game, and you're okay with it. But you also need a little bit more of what was there from Tuesday night's game against Montreal. A little bit more inspired play, as Tocchet called it, but energy. Guys trying to make plays and making effective ones. Guys also keeping it simple to make an effective play. Being around the net, putting yourself in a position to take good passes, to also shoot the puck more often. That's how you end up with 42 shots on goal at the end of the night, because they didn't get many in overtime. They only got 2. So that should tell you something. And I look at that and see more and more signs that, okay, when this team goes out and plays tough opponents that definitely have a better roster than they do, and that maybe play a style that doesn't lend to what the Flyers do. The Flyers are kind of a big identity bunch, and they're still trying to kind of figure out that identity in full, but they're a big identity bunch. And if it's band together, forecheck hard, play good defense, take advantage of your opportunities wherever they may come, whether that's special teams, transition, breakaways, whatever it may be. And you lose all of that in one weekend, essentially. Like, those 2 games over the weekend had none of that. And that's how you quickly, when you see how quickly, I think that's the point behind Tocchet's wake-up call a little bit, is that when you see how quickly things change, you're a team hovering in the last wild card spot or one of the last wild card spots, and you're in the playoff picture after beating Nashville, and then 2 games go by to end the weekend and the homestand. You lose both. You go 3-2 on a 5-game homestand. You're 6-5-1 through 12 games. Next thing you know, you wake up and you are in a tie for the bottom of the Eastern Conference, because every team in the Eastern Conference has a record and points percentage above 500. That's how quickly things change. And I think that that's what Rick Tocchet is trying to get across, is you've got to play with that kind of will every single night and find it to help get more points in the standings, because that's what differentiates the teams that make the playoffs and get a shot over the ones that end up focusing on draft lottery position. So that's part of what he's trying to get through to the team. And as you do those things more consistently, as you see it happen, you're going to see areas that are successful, and you're going to see players be more successful that weren't in the past. You're going to see things. Things like that are part of why Trevor Zegras has bounced back. It's part of why, despite certain elements of his game not being the same player, Sean Couturier has a lot more points than people would have expected him to have probably through the first 12, 13 games. You can also look the other direction and say, why isn't Travis Konechny making a bigger impact? Why isn't Matvei Michkov making a bigger impact? And it becomes a question for them as well. It doesn't mean that they're not players who are willing or who haven't done it in the past. It just means that you might not be seeing it right then and there. And sometimes it's always good to get the reminder, to have somebody who puts it into your mind a little bit more. Don't forget about this. Don't forget about this element. Don't forget about these things that you do that make you successful. Don't forget about the part of that part of the game that lends itself to your strongest part. Maybe it's good forechecking, being a player who goes in on the forecheck. If Zegras is a better forechecker by the end of the season, you become a better goal scorer and point producer, because it helps you gain possession more often. Or if you're somebody who leans on your defense but can make something happen in transition, use that to your advantage. It's all of those types of things that go into it. And as you see what this team can do, and I think it's a big deal that they've beaten, Pittsburgh has been off to a really good start. Montreal, really good start. And you've beaten those teams. You managed to get a win against Florida, knowing their firepower. You managed to get, you get a win over Minnesota in overtime. Seattle is now at the top of their division, and you beat them pretty handily when they came through. And that might just be a matter of timing, but still, you're losing 1-goal games to the Floridas and Carolinas of the hockey world. So all of these things are in your favor, and you have the chops to go up against just about anybody. And that's the way the most of the league is. But you're showing you have the chops to do it. You just have to execute better, and you have to stick to the game plan, and you have to have that will, as Rick Tocchet is talking about. And, is there an element where trying to kind of put a buzzword into people's minds is a little Tortorella-esque in a way? Sure. But Tocchet isn't just sitting around trying to, let things play out and see what happens. He's being a proactive coach. He's trying to get to the bottom of anything that may not be working. He's also trying to let what works continue to thrive when it can. And you've seen it go both ways for them so far. They're about, let's face it, a 7-5-1 record through 13 games is, if not better, about where most people would have expected them to be. And that's all you can ask for so far, is you've gone through kind of it's not the most overly busy schedule. It's not like you're playing a bunch of times where it's 4-6, 5-8. You've only had a few of those so far. Only had like one or two of them at most. But are you seeing, a lot of tough teams come through, especially come through your building? Sure. And when you can stand up against those teams and play well enough to win a game and keep getting points in the standings, it's going to create more of a narrative that you can be a team that's here later on in the year. So with that, I want to shift over to the next topic, which is to talk about special teams a little bit, because listen, this is an area we know has plagued the Flyers in the past. They've had, some years they've had a average penalty kill. Some years they've had a really good penalty kill. And this year is one of those years so far. They have a really good penalty kill. Entering the game against Montreal, it was actually tied for first in the National Hockey League. It's now fifth following that game. They had a 2-4 night. It's, one of those nights. Montreal's a really good power play team. They've got a great top unit. And if you allow them the opportunity, they will be able to score a few goals. So it was just one of those nights. But being in the top 5 in penalty kill is really good. And it's a step in the right direction for a team that needs to get special teams down. And that's kind of why I want to focus more on the area that we all know has been a thorn in their side for so long, the power play. And yeah, the power play very early on was really hitting a rut early. It was one of those long droughts, and it was one of those situations that put you 28th, 29th, 30th, close to last in the league again in power play percentage. And now the Flyers are actually 14th in the league following the game against Montreal. And they have 9 power play goals in 13 games. That's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal to be able to start to do it with some consistency, to have a few games on the schedule through 13 where you've scored multiple power play goals. This team wasn't doing anything like that last season. It was very rare. It was very difficult for them to build momentum within games or to identify the momentum areas, when your power play is the way that it is, and it's not working, and the combinations are not working, and the setup is not working, and the style and speed of it is not working. They get a minute and 32 seconds of 5-on-3 time against Montreal in the first period, and then bang, bang, 2 goals, 2 power play goals. They have a 3-0 lead. When those opportunities are placed in front of you, a minute and 32 seconds of 5-on-3 time, you want to take advantage of that. You have to take advantage of that, because it's the only way you put yourself in front of the possible track for where the game is going to go. It's the way you maintain the momentum of getting a power play in the first place, and don't hand it back to the team that doesn't need the momentum, that doesn't need a reason to feel confident about where this game is going because they killed off a 5-on-3. It's 1-0. They need 1 goal to get it tied up. No, you kind of bury them a little more with 2 more quick goals, and it feels like it changes the complexion of the game. Of course, it doesn't matter scoring 2 power play goals when you also surrender 2 in the next period, but it has helped them in other games, and you're certainly going to need that. They still, for where the penalty kill is, by the way, they still take way too many penalties, which is something to keep in mind when you're going to play some of the teams that you're going to as this moves forward. Like you're going to play a team like Edmonton coming up very soon. And when you do, you don't want to take penalties. You certainly don't want to take the roughly 5 penalties a game that you have, or, even in a game like that, the Montreal power play is 2 for 4. They had 1 power play prior to the second period, went 2 for 3 for the rest of the game. You don't want that situation. You do not want to be put into a spot where you have to be, or not even where you have to be. It's put into a spot where special teams is dragging you down from both ends, that you can't kill a penalty, you also can't score a power play goal. You want to keep whatever's working with keeping this power play going, you want to keep, and whatever is working with your defense and penalty kill, you want to keep going as well. Some of that is goaltending. Some of it is also being in the right areas, getting in lanes to either take away passes or block shots, staying with your assignments, all of that. And that can build to something that helps you be a successful team. What do we see about teams that make the playoffs? They're usually in the top half of the league in special teams. Well, right now the Flyers are there, and that doesn't mean that they're necessarily definitively going to be a playoff team or anything like that, but it inspires some hope that if they can put those two areas together, maybe stop taking so many penalties, but put those two areas together, take advantage of their power plays, be on the board fairly regularly, you could be in a position where those two special teams categories are two of your biggest strengths and help you be a team that continues to play into the spring months. That is really one of the main core areas. It's goaltending, it's special teams, it's being able to do those little detail items while also factoring in that you need to play a different way at 5-on-5. You need to stick to your systems and stick to what the game flow and all that at 5-on-5. You need everything else to be successful when you're not at 5-on-5. You need your power play to be good. You need your penalty kill to be good. And so far, they're getting that. And it kind of couples itself with the goaltending conversation. If you can get the quality goaltending to go with it in any situation, in being able to help you kill off penalties, being able to take care of that one opportunity that the other team may get while shorthanded, whatever it may be, you want to be among the leaders in those categories. And the Flyers are starting to trend upward in the power play conversation. Their penalty kill's been really strong all year, and that is what helps build your identity as well. So just keeping all of that in mind and understanding that playing to certain areas is what can help you be a successful team. There seems to be a good foundation there for the Flyers right now. And if you can continue to find ways to score goals around the net on the power play and keep it out of your net when you have to kill a penalty, the standings are going to tell you what, by the end of the year, they'll tell you what teams were good in special teams and which teams weren't. Because usually those teams that are left standing are the ones that end up being there in the playoffs, potentially making deep runs. If that's what you want to do, you're going to need to have good special teams to go and be part of it. Let's get to the 3 stars of the week. And star number 3 of the week is Travis Konechny. Konechny with 2 goals, 5 points on the week. Not his best week, to be honest. It was a lot of players from based on the weekend that didn't put themselves in the running for stars of the week, but Konechny consistent enough with the offense, brought a lot more energy in the Montreal game, I would say. You're starting to see the offensive production meet last year's. That's just his weekly numbers. He's obviously doing a little bit more than that on the season to this point. It's starting to catch up with some of the other players that got hot off the start. It's surpassing a guy like Owen Tippett. It's keeping pace with Noah Cates, Bobby Brink, Tyson Forrester. Maybe you can put yourself on the radar to be in the same kind of place as some of your team leaders. We're going to get to one of those guys in a minute. But first, star number 2, Bobby Brink. Pair of goals in the win over Montreal. He's also just had a pretty solid week, all things considered. And it's tough when your line is broken up, and it's been the most consistent line the Flyers have had all year. But when your line is broken up, especially when one of those guys goes down with an injury, you have to adjust. And it felt like Brink was one of the few players that was trying to deliver that energy. He's had his share of moments in games as well. Earlier, beyond prior to this week, he's had those games where you see him making a bigger impact, and as a result, it puts him in more of a conversation to continue to be a guy that can be relied upon. He's certainly been, I'm curious because he had 2 goals in the game already. It didn't get to this point in the shootout, but if it would have, and the Flyers needed a third shooter, I wonder if Bobby Brink was the guy, because he's been in that spot before, and it wouldn't have been a shock at all to see that. But let's get to star number 1 of the week, and it's Trevor Zegras. Another 2 goals and 6 points on the week. He's just been lighting it up. And yeah, he has another 3-point game against Nashville. He has 2 against Montreal. Gets the shootout goal there, which he's just unfair in the shootouts. He has this knack of being able to do whatever he wants. He goes in slow. He picks his spot, makes the goal. He think there's going to be another move, and then there's not, and he goes 5-hole usually. It's great. But Zegras has just been such a breath of fresh air. The personality is great. He seems to be finding chemistry with a lot of players when he's out there. He seems to always be around the net and be a guy who is prepared to contribute points. He gets himself with those last 2, with the assists against Montreal. He gets himself to 15 points on the season in the 13th game. 15 points was all he had in 31 games 2 seasons ago. And I know that season was plagued with injury and things like that, but that's all he could get. And now you're seeing a player who looks like he's well on his way to resurgence and finding the qualities that he had that made him a potential superstar then, that got him to all-star games and for all the fun stuff. And that includes his personality, but for all of the fun stuff that goes with what Zegras brings, he's got an element about him right now that says, I'm here to try to win games. I want to be successful, and I'm going to do things that maybe I haven't done a lot in my career before that could go a long way to helping the team win. So we're going to start to prepare to wrap things up. We're going to start, by the way, with taking a quick look ahead at what's to come. So the Flyers have the Nashville Predators back on the schedule again on Thursday night, 8 p.m. puck drop there, and Flyers are going to look for a repeat performance as they beat Nashville 4-1 last Thursday. So that will be the first game of 2 between now and our next show. Flyers taking on the Ottawa Senators on Saturday afternoon. That'll be a 1 o'clock puck drop. Got a doubleheader going on at the Xfinity Mobile Arena, and that's going to be the first of those 2. So you get Flyers Senators in the afternoon, and another repeat opponent. The Flyers have faced Ottawa this season, lost 2-1 to them as well. They keep losing games 2-1, and all of their losses are either 2-1 or 5-2, it appears, other than the overtime loss to Carolina. And they just keep winning games in shootouts as well. It's kind of funny how that's worked out so far. So it's going to just about do it for us for this week. Just a reminder, the next episode of Flyers Files is going to be next Wednesday, 11 a.m. usual time. That's when the show will drop, and you can catch up on everything that is to be discussed in Flyers hockey. We'll have 2 more games to go over. We'll see what topics emerge. We're also going to prepare you for what is to come with that week. Busy weekend. Flyers are going to have 3 and 4 from that show after that show airs. Wednesday night, they're hosting the Edmonton Oilers, and then they have a weekend back-to-back on the road against Dallas and St. Louis. So something to certainly keep in mind before they have a much longer break that comes into play. A break that you don't typically see during the season. You don't get many in-season breaks that are going to be as long as some of the Flyers are going to have. I mean, even 3 days between Saturday's game against Ottawa and the next game against Edmonton is going to be pretty substantial. So it starts there realistically. But nonetheless, that's where everything kind of, you get this chance to get everybody back and get everybody healthy that's injured. You get this chance to see more about what your team is all about, and you get a chance to allow your team that time for both rest and recovery, but also practice time, because it's really important early in the season. And it seems like either gaining some practice time or having the ability to go on the road, for example, for a little bit. They get a week away from home. They're going to play 1 home game. They get a gap. There's going to be practices in there. They go play another home game. They get back on the road for a little bit, another gap. You get your guys back, but you also get the chance to work on some things right after the weekend. Bad weekend in the back-to-back, and Rick Tocchet's talking about, well, we're going to have to work on net front drills because we need to get guys to go to the front of the net and be in position to try to get more goals. The best way to do that is to have practices. So they're going to have plenty of them over the next couple of weeks. Got a couple of interesting games, though, too. Nashville's going to be looking for that result to go the other way after losing to the Flyers. Ottawa, team you've seen before, but also a team from the playoffs last year. So just something to keep in mind about where they could be going. And see if you can't finish this week off and start to build back on what you had started. 6-3-1 was great. You lose 2 in a row. It hurts you. now they're back in the right direction after that win against Montreal in the shootout, a wild game that was. So as we get ready to get out of here, once again, just you can follow all of my coverage of Flyers hockey at Kevin_Durso. That's going to be that's the username for both Twitter X and also Instagram, where you can find pre and post game reels that break down the game, give you a few takeaways, give you something to look forward to in the game as well, a player to watch, for example, whatever it may be. Find all of that there. Read more about it on 973ESPN.com, where every Sunday you're going to also find my Flyers Files observation column that's going to highlight some things. It might be things that we discussed during the show. It might also be things that come up as the games come up. And certainly, it could be potential topics for the following show. The shooter mentality thing, the shot mentality that Rick Tocchet was talking about was part of my first column this past Sunday. And by the end of the night, after I had published that column, there was even more context to it and more to talk about as we did this week. So once again, I'm Kevin Durso, your host, and this has been another episode of Flyers Files. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again next week.